Alas, it is here. Spider-Man 6, the Prewrite, and the finale to our college trilogy, which for Peter Parker, or Tom Holland's Peter Parker, has gone from a simple college excursion to an outright conflict with Wilson Fisk, Kraven the Hunter, the Scorpion, the loss of his best friend Harry Osborn to Kingpin's side, and a team-up with Matt Murdock's Daredevil, as well as a relationship with Gwen Stacy, and meeting the young Miles Morales. So there's a lot. There's quite a bit to unpack in this finale. I would definitely say that if this was an actual film, the runtime of this would probably be somewhere around like Avengers Endgame level, because it's a big, this would be a very, very big film, because there's just so much going on. There's so much to get done. There's so many characters to juggle. There's so many story beats to touch. Because it's not just, it's a Spider-Man and a Daredevil team up versus Kingpin, and there's Venom, and there's Kraven, and there's the Green Goblin, and there's Miles, and there's Gwen, and to perfectly balance all of those characters, and to make sure it is not overstuffed, we need to flesh it out. Now, obviously, having 4 villains in a movie is a really bad idea, but the positive lining in this scenario is that we have already established all of the bad guys. Wilson Fisk has already been established. Harry Osborn has already been established. Venom has been built up to, and Kraven has been established. This means that we already know who these characters are as villains. We don't need to introduce them. We just get right into it. So, yeah, without further ado, let's begin the finale of the college trilogy. Let's begin, shall we? We open with Wilson Fisk. He's looking at a computer image of downtown New York, where he sees a group of his thugs and his mercenaries in the middle of an alleyway, fighting against 2 figures in the dark. He looks to the grimace, and we can see that he is upset. He's blind, he can't see, but he knows what's going on. We then cut to that alleyway, and we see our Spider-Man, Tom Holland's Peter Parker, wearing his classical red and blue suit that he wore in the first installment of the college trilogy and the end of No Way Home. It's a little beat up from his last fight with Kraven. It's a little battle damaged, and he has sewn it back together, but you can definitely tell that it is not finished. We see him taking out a bunch of thugs, and he's doing a pretty good job of it, and then he calls up to one of the buildings and he says, "This one's all yours." And that's when we see Matt Murdock in the Daredevil costume jump down and start helping Spider-Man take out the thugs. We get a brief little action sequence of Spider-Man and Daredevil fighting side by side, and we see that for the past month, both Spider-Man and Daredevil have been working together to track down the Kingpin and bring an end to this entire conflict. And we can see that they work very well together. They definitely work. Daredevil is a little more brutal than Spider-Man. He's a little more ruthless. He's a little more willing to kill, I should say. And we can see that maybe Spider-Man isn't the biggest fan of this mentality. He isn't the biggest fan of it, but he's going to go along with it because he's worked with Daredevil for some time now, and Daredevil is a really, he's a good asset, he's a good man. For the record, neither Peter nor Matt know each other's secret identities. They only know each other as Spider-Man and Daredevil. I know Matt Murdock showed up at the end of the last film as Matt Murdock, but we're just going to say that in the 5th movie, he just said he knew a guy that could help Spider-Man. And Spider-Man has not revealed his identity, keeping both of their secret identities because, yeah, why not? Anyway, we cut back to Wilson Fisk. He is watching this security footage of Spider-Man and Daredevil, and he looks to both Harry Osborn and Kraven the Hunter, and he says, "Shall we begin?" We then get our classic Marvel logo, and we cut back to somebody's house. And we're going to say it's Daredevil's house. We see that Spider-Man has an evicted note in his apartment. He hasn't paid rent in quite a long time because he's been so busy helping Daredevil with tracking down the Kingpin. So he crashes at Daredevil's place. And so the two of them are kind of laying out a map of the city. They talk about how in the past month they have taken out a few of Kingpin's territories, but they haven't tracked him. I mean, they've basically narrowed it down that he is at Fisk Tower, or he has purchased Avengers Tower, or Stark Tower, which is now Fisk Tower, like in that sector. But Wilson Fisk has been very crafty, and he's constantly moved his forces to draw the two heroes away. However, Matt Murdock and Peter Parker, being absolute brainiacs, have basically somewhat figured out Kingpin's tactics, and they're like, all right, he's in this area. Stark Tower is the big vocal point, so he's likely there. But they also know that Kingpin is going to be... He's going to be a tricky opponent. He's not going to be easy to face. And we can have Daredevil maybe explaining to Spider-Man some of he and Kingpin's history from the Daredevil TV show. We see Daredevil explain to Peter, this is not someone you want to be taking lightly. You do not want to go up against this guy with a bit of arrogance. You have to be on your toes. This guy is not someone you mess around with. He's a dangerous guy. And Spider-Man's like, all right, I got it. So Spider-Man goes home. He sees the evicted note, and we see him go to feast, and he goes to sleep. And he gets a bunch of flashbacks back to the last film where he's beating the living daylights out of Kraven, and it cuts to him beating the living daylights out of Norman Osborn. And we get a bunch of PTSD of Aunt May's death, of saying goodbye to watching MJ fall, all this stuff. Now, this is off point, but a lot of you mentioned in the comments how Spider-Man should be having PTSD throughout the entire trilogy, and this was something that I was considering. This was something that would have been part of the movies. I just forgot to make a point of mentioning it, because I think it's a little more important in this film. I'm bringing it up now, but throughout all three films, Peter would be having these PTSD flashbacks. So, there you go. So, he wakes up, and he gets to work at Feast, and we see he is still helping people around. He's still doing Peter Parker stuff. He's still helping people as Peter Parker. He's just been a little more distracted. We see that Miles Morales is also working there, and we see Peter and Miles. They have a bit of a bond, and Peter's definitely being a bit of a mentor to Miles. And then we see a little later, Miles is getting chased by some bullies, and then Spider-Man saves him. And again, Miles does not know Peter's identity. He knows Peter Parker, and he knows Spider-Man, but he doesn't know they're the same person. And we can get a scene that's kind of similar to the PS4 cutscene where Spider-Man actually teaches Miles some simple fighting techniques. We can see that Peter Parker has been a mentor to Miles Morales, not just as a good person, but Spider-Man has also been somewhat of a mentor for Miles, since Miles did kind of start to get his abilities, or he got bit by the spider, and he isn't really good with his powers. He's still getting the hang of them. But we can see Spider-Man has been kind of teaching him to control them. He's been teaching Miles, how to control his spidey sense and how to pull his punches so he doesn't do anything he might regret. And so we get to see Peter Parker, and we see he's with Gwen, and we see them, like, have some conversations. We see them talk. Maybe she has a conversation about how her dad has been fighting left, right, and center. This Kingpin guy has been non-stop, like, he's been sending his forces throughout New York City. He's been a true menace. And Spider-Man, he's understanding of this. He's like, I know, like, me and this Daredevil guy, we're gonna bring an end to this. We are gonna stop him. We cut back to Wilson Fisk, and he is deploying his mercenaries through all around the city, like very random spots. And Harry Osborn comes in, and he's very confused by Kingpin's tactics, because from what Harry is seeing, Kingpin's just kind of randomly throwing his mercenaries in different places. He asks what he's doing, and Kingpin explains to Harry that this isn't a random act. It's Spider-Man and Daredevil, they're closing in on our secret base, Fisk Tower. And it's only a matter of time before they get here. So we're going to do a test. I'm sending my mercenaries to just cause havoc and destruction all throughout the city. Like, they're not going to be able to resist. And even if they do, like, they're going to have the entire city burning behind them. So we can draw this fight out so much and just drag this conflict out until we can get to a safer area. And if they try and strike at us first, the whole city's going to burn down, and we can blame them for it. So either way, it's a win-win for us. It's a win-win for Kingpin, because he can destroy Spider-Man's reputation. He can, I don't know if Daredevil has, like, he's more undercover, but he can destroy them, their reputation as heroes. And he can blame the destruction on them. Or he can just drag out this fighting. So we see Spider-Man and Daredevil. We see some more of them fighting. We're probably going to get a few montages of them fighting, rather than cutting back and forth to them having fight scenes. And we have them meeting up again. And they're like, all right, Kingpin's trying to drag us out. He's stalling. And so Daredevil makes the decision that we should just go after Kingpin. Like, this is his tactic. He is stalling until he can make the proper move. We need to strike now. But Spider-Man, being the more, like, non-lethal of the heroes, he wants to just continue to fight the thugs and stop them. He wants to kind of take out the thugs and protect people. And we can see that there is Daredevil and Spider-Man, they are definitely not the same hero. They definitely have different ideals. And they maybe argue over this a little bit. They're not entirely in agreement on how to go about things. So they both kind of go home and they're like, we'll think it over. We'll think each other's plan over. Let's let Kingpin make the next move. And so this is when we're going to cut to Eddie Brock. Now, Eddie is just... something's really wrong for Eddie. His physical strength is way stronger than he was before. And he was already a bodybuilder. He's more violent. He's more angry. And he's at a therapist and he's talking. Like, sometimes he's not even in control of himself and he doesn't know what's going on. And he talks like, it feels like there's somebody else living inside my mind. Like, it feels like there's two me's. And he leaves the therapist, and we can see that he's still kind of angry at Peter Parker. Like, he still hates Peter Parker. We go to the Daily Bugle, and maybe we see, again, their rivalry is still continuing. Maybe he tries to talk to Peter, and Peter just pushes him aside, and is kind of an asshole to him. And we can see, their rivalry is heating up. Peter Parker does not have time for Eddie Brock. He's too busy. We can see that Peter's pretty isolated in this movie. He's kind of really independent. He's really focused on Spider-Man stuff and not Peter Parker stuff. And we see Peter and Eddie get into a bit of a scuffle. And then we can see maybe Eddie's hand kind of turns into the symbiote as he clenches his fist. And we can see the venom slowly coming out. We then get another scene with Peter and Gwen, and they're just talking. Maybe they're on that rooftop from No Way Home. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're just hanging out somewhere. And they're talking about how the end of semester's coming up. Peter's been failing, like, all of his classes because he's just been so caught up with Spider-Man work. And he probably is going to get kicked out of the college. And Gwen also admits her feelings that Peter just has not been around. He has just been... Like, Gwen, unlike the Sam Raimi MJ, is very understanding of why Peter Parker is not around all the time. She understands that he's Spider-Man, like, he's got a lot on his plate, but she does caution him, saying, like, you know you're also Peter Parker. You don't just have to be Spider-Man. And Peter says, I know, but, like, there's so much danger in the city right now. There's so much going on. Somebody's got to stop this man. Somebody's got to put an end to this villainy. And Gwen says, it doesn't have to be you alone. And Peter's like, I'm not alone. Well, at least I don't think I'm alone. And we get, like, some romantic stuff between them because they're a couple. And so then we get another scene with Wilson Fisk. And he's talking to Harry and Craven. And he's like, all right, so we haven't heard from Spider-Man or the Daredevil yet. Like, they haven't made a move yet, which is interesting. And Kingpin's thinking, we can play this, but he wants to go all out. He wants to go all out against these two. He wants to break them psychologically. And he knows Daredevil a little bit. He knows Daredevil quite a bit. But he doesn't know much about Spider-Man. Again, Kingpin does not know Spider-Man's identity. And so he goes to Harry Osborn. He says, Harry, you met Spider-Man. Do you know anything about him, his identity? Harry looks conflicted because he does know Spider-Man's identity is Peter Parker. But instead, he shakes his head and he says, I don't know his identity. But I really don't like him. And then we get a scene of Craven saying, like, I sniffed Spider-Man's trail. There's a blonde-haired girl. Stacy. Gwen Stacy said her name was. Remember, in the last film, Craven was tracking Spider-Man and saw him and Gwen together. Kingpin says, perfect start. You are going to go abduct, this Gwen Stacy, and we're going to draw this Spider-Man out. And we can see Harry is really conflicted on this. He's really messed up. And so, anyway, we get a scene of Peter, and he's just, like, he's like walking down the street or something. He's just trying to clear his head after a long day. And that is when we hear a glider. And it's Harry Osborn. He's in the Project Goblin armor. He's in the glider. And he just attacks Peter. And this fight would be kind of similar to the fight between Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man and James Franco's Green Goblin. But it would be a little different because the circumstances are a little different. There's no wedding ring to catch. And there's no, you killed my father. Harry just wants the fighting to stop. And he's really, like, pissed off at Peter. I mean, Peter's just kind of abandoned him. He hasn't even tried to reach out and apologize for everything. And he's just kind of left him. He's abandoned him. And now there's all this fighting in the streets and this violence throughout New York, and it's Peter's fault. And Peter's like, Harry, what have you done? Like, you shouldn't be working. You shouldn't be doing this. And the two of them fight, and Spider-Man barely overpowers Harry. But instead of Harry hitting his head, Spider-Man pulls him from near death and saves his life. And then he confronts Harry And he tells him, like, I really wanted to be your friend. There is so much going on. How can you work for this Kingpin? He's the guy starting this violence. I'm trying to stop it. Like, and so we get, like, a moment between them. And Peter, like, tells Harry, like, you will be my friend. And I'm not going to kill you. So he leaves. And then we see Peter Parker. He's at Feast. He's remembering this fight with Harry. And he's kind of upset. And that's when Eddie Brock shows up. And he is mad. We can see that the Venom symbiote, like, he has, like, veins of the symbiote going down his arms and his face and his neck. And Peter thinks something's really off with him. And he is just looking for a fight. And then he just starts arguing with Peter. And then that's when Miles Morales shows up and starts, like, trying to defend Peter. And Eddie is getting, like, really angry. And then he's escorted out of the building. This is when he goes to the Daily Bugle. And he's still really angry, but he's calming down. And that's when we see this J. Jonah Jameson, and he's on the phone with a mysterious caller. And we cut into the conversation, and we hear that it is Wilson Fisk. He tells J. Jonah Jameson that he knows of his hatred for Spider-Man, and he needs his help. He needs the Daily Bugle's help to make sure Spider-Man is forever a menace. See, Kingpin is playing the game. He knows the Daily Bugle does not enjoy Spider-Man, so he's amplifying them. He is putting them against Spider-Man. He's forcing Spider-Man and Daredevil into a difficult situation. He's trying to mess with them psychologically and on a chess game. We really want to establish how much of a menace the Kingpin is without him being a physical threat. Like, he is a mastermind. So he is manipulating this version of J. Jonah Jameson. And that's when Eddie Brock comes in. And J. Jonah Jameson's like, yeah, I will help you take pictures of Spider-Man. And I will help you spread the word. I'll turn the people against. And Wilson Fisk is like, I will help you turn the people against Spider-Man. And J. Jonah Jameson's like, yeah. Because this version of him hates Spider-Man. And so Eddie Brock comes into the room, and J. Jonah Jameson's like, I have an assignment for you. You're going to try and make fake news of Spider-Man. And you're going to send them to this anonymous source who's going to help us. So we cut to Spider-Man and Daredevil. They're again fighting a group of thugs. They're still not fully in agreement, but they're going with it, and we see Eddie Brock. He is stalking them, and he is taking these pictures. We then cut, and we see the pictures being sold to Wilson Fisk, and he's looking at them, and he notices something is really wrong with Eddie. And he says, you know, I can help you, Mr. Brock, but you can help me, too. And he tells Eddie, like, what do you know of Spider-Man? Like, what do you know of him? And Eddie doesn't know his identity, so he says, I don't know. And he says, like, he really hates this guy called Peter Parker, who also works at the Daily Bugle. Now, Kingpin says, interesting. How's about this? You help me kill Spider-Man, and I'll help you get rid of this Peter Parker. Eddie Brock's like, all right. And so Kingpin, and then he asks Kingpin, like, how should I, like, stop Peter Parker? And he's like, take him psychologically. And Eddie Brock remembers Miles Morales and Peter were close. Maybe he even saw Spider-Man and Miles, like, train fighting with each other. Maybe Eddie is like takes some pictures of Spider-Man and he sees him and Miles training. So Eddie Brock kidnaps Miles. And so Gwen is captured by Kraven, and Miles is caught by Venom. and they're held at Fisk Tower. And Peter freaks out because he realizes they're trying to take the people I love. They're trying to take my girlfriend. They're trying to take my new little mentee, my new little student. Miles isn't really little, but you get what I mean. My new protege. And so he maybe gets some footage. Maybe he goes to Feast and he sees that it was Eddie Brock. So he storms into the Daily Bugle and he pushes Eddie to the, over. He pushes him and he's like, where did you bring Miles? And, they get into a big scuffle and they're both getting really heated and Eddie just breaks. This is when his hand turns to the symbiote and he punches Peter through like a wall. Just throws him right through. Peter gets up as Eddie Brock fully transforms into Venom. And, of course, Peter Parker doesn't have his suit, but he's like, dear God. He knows, the symbiote suit. He knows that this is the symbiote suit. It's turned Eddie into a monster. So Peter begins to evacuate everybody in the Daily Bugle. Betty Brant, J. Jonah Jameson, Hoffman, etc., etc. And we get this violent battle between Peter Parker and Venom. I mean, this fight scene, the best way I can describe it is the fight between Peter and Norman at Aunt May's apartment, but with a lot of blood and a lot more ruthless. And Peter's trying his best. He's capable of at least standing up to the Venom, but he's more focused on evacuating everybody. And Venom is just absolutely shredding him. And this fight, Peter's left as a bloody pulp. And he pulls himself out of the Daily Bugle. He gets to his feet and he keeps on going. We then cut to Peter at Aunt May's grave. And he's just in tears. He's talking to her. And he's apologizing that he had all this power and he didn't have enough responsibility. He allowed this Eddie Brock to become a monster. He allowed Gwen and Miles and Harry to be lost forever. Not lost forever, but lost to the Kingpin. He's allowed Wilson Fisk to cause chaos, and he doesn't know what to do anymore. And that's when Matt Murdock shows up. Maybe Matt Murdock, maybe Daredevil, whichever you prefer. And Matt Murdock tells Peter, there are always going to be sacrifices. We have great power, and it's our responsibility to keep going, even when those we love are lost. And Daredevil, or Matt Murdock, gives Peter a pep talk. Yeah, it would be Matt Murdock, because they don't know each other's secret identities. And so they're like, but we have a fight. We got to rescue Miles. We got to rescue them. And that's when we cut to Harry. And then he gets a phone call from Peter saying, it's a big apology letter. And telling Harry, things are going to get dangerous. Kingpin has to be stopped. You don't want to hold Gwen hostage. Now, we know that Harry, Peter, and Gwen have been our trio throughout this trilogy. Harry is just as much Gwen's friend as he is Peter's friend. And we can see that he is very unsettled by the fact that Kingpin's holding her hostage. Maybe they got in a fight before this phone call. And we can see that he really is shaken, and he really doesn't know where he wants to go. This Green Goblin does not have the whole insanity. It's like James Franco's Green Goblin, but done right. He's not doing this out of sadism or insanity. He's more doing this out of he doesn't know where he fits in. And he thought he fit in here. But now he doesn't know. We cut to Spider-Man and Daredevil. They're both in their suits. And they go right for Fisk Tower. They're going to go Peter has to stop the Venom. He has to put an end to this rivalry and the mess that he caused, because he feels responsible for creating Venom and the Green Goblin, and Daredevil has a bone to pick with Kingpin. So they race over, we see some cool swinging, and Craven goes to Kingpin and says, like, they're coming straight for the tower. And Kingpin's like, as expected. And so we see just waves of mercenaries just come out, and we see Spider-Man and Daredevil. We get a big action sequence. We see them working together. They play to each other's strengths. Maybe Daredevil tries some mercy. Maybe Spider-Man tries some more violence. Who knows? And ultimately, they get through the thugs after a crazy battle sequence. We see Harry. He's really conflicted at this point because he knows Peter isn't doing this out of vengeance. He's doing it out of justice and hope, while he knows Kingpin is doing the wrong thing. So Spider-Man and Daredevil, they break into Fisk Tower. Kingpin orders Craven to go intercept them. And Craven jumps down and he sees Spider-Man and Daredevil. And Daredevil tackles Craven to the ground. And he tells Spider-Man, go, get your friends, get them out of here, and get Fisk. And we're going to get a full-on fight scene between Daredevil and Craven the Hunter. Because why the hell not? So Spider-Man, he moves up. And he moves through the tower. He takes a bunch of thugs down. And we see that Eddie Brock, who Kingpin has again been like, yep, you are part of my family. You're part of my bad guy group now. Eddie Brock sees Spider-Man, and Kingpin nods to Venom, or Eddie, and says, like, I let you do your thing. Now you're going to help me. And so Eddie goes into the Venom, like, he goes all Venom, and he punches Peter and throws him against the wall, and they start fighting. So we cut between Spider-Man and Venom's fight, and then we see Craven and Daredevil's fight. And both are going to be vicious and brutal, and pretty not lengthy, I should say. Anyway, Daredevil is going to overpower Craven in some way, however you want to have Daredevil beat Craven, but he does. So Daredevil moves up. Peter, although he is struggling to contend with Venom, he is able to free Miles and Gwen, and he consistently puts their lives before his own. He's getting them out of danger while Venom is absolutely shredding him apart. Daredevil enters the room, and he and Kingpin, like, they know that they're in the same room. They sense each other. They get their reunion, and then they get their rematch. And finally, Harry is watching this fight between Venom and Spider-Man, and he finally makes his decision. Venom has Spider-Man pinned to the ground, and that's when we see a pumpkin bomb get blasted at Venom's face. Harry Osborn pulls himself back to the light side, and he and Spider-Man fight together against Eddie Brock. We see them kind of make up as friends, and they basically go and they continue to fight the Venom. Anyway, Miles and Gwen, they're like, we're not leaving them. We're going to go help them. And we see Miles just goes invisible. And he just pops out, and he's like, whoa, like, what was that? And Miles doesn't know what the hell happened. He's like, what did I just do? And so they're like, yeah, we'll think about it later. Let's go. And so we get a big fight scene. Daredevil and Craven, they have their rematch. Spider-Man and Harry fight Venom. And Miles and Gwen try and help in some way. So basically, Peter realizes that fire is a weakness for the Venom. And he realizes that Venom is too powerful for him and Harry. And so he realizes, like, something happens, or maybe, like, Gwen and Miles are in trouble. And Peter says to Harry, you, like, go save them from their trouble. Maybe, like, a bunch of mercenaries come out and they're attacking. So he's like, you go and stop them. I've got Venom. Harry knows Peter does not have Venom, like, under control, but Spider-Man's like, trust me. Harry accepts, and he goes and he protects Miles and Gwen. Maybe Miles uses his Venom bite. Again, he doesn't know what he's doing, but he's like, whoa. New powers. And so the Spider-Man, his suit is, like, really torn up. Like, it is shredded. He has, like, claw scratches all over his chest. He is bloodied. He is battered. And Venom rips off the mask. He sees Peter, and he is enraged. Maybe he makes a mockery, like, you made your whole life over, like, berating yourself. And he's, like, taunting him. And then he thrusts one of his Venom, like his limb, and he stabs Peter right through the chest, goes completely through him, stabs him, throws him into the wall, and just starts wailing on him, just beating him to an absolute pulp. Daredevil defeats Kingpin, and basically Peter looks up to Harry and says, now. And Harry drops a pumpkin bomb, and Peter catches it with his web shooter, and he throws it at Venom. The blast sends him flying back, and the Venom symbiote, like, flies off of Eddie for a brief moment, or it slowly comes off. And Peter uses the last of his energy not to kill Venom, but to save Eddie Brock, pulling him free of the symbiote and saving his life, unlike the Topher Grace version. The Venom symbiote evaporates and explodes. This explosion throws Kingpin to the floor, which allows Daredevil to get the drop on him and defeat him. Eddie Brock is saved. And Eddie Brock is unconscious, like, because of the blast. And Peter, he tries to get up, and Kingpin and Eddie Brock, they're arrested by the authorities. Kraven's dead. And Peter doesn't let the authorities see his face. But they're going to celebrate, and then Peter collapses. And we see just how messed up he is. We see how broken and battered that Venom made him. And Harry's like, get me a medic right now. And Peter's like, no, there is no time. And we get this, and Daredevil, he just walks out of there. He goes out with the authorities. He's like, I'm going to give you guys some time. And he goes out with the authorities to bring Kingpin into justice once and for all. And we get a final heartfelt goodbye as Harry, Gwen, and Miles. Just very similar to Tony's death, but not Tony's death. Like, I don't want it to be an exact copy. I want there to be, like, Peter gives, like, his final words to each of them, has, like, a special conversation with each of them. He tells Gwen, like, it's gonna be okay. This is why I didn't want to get into anything serious, because I didn't want you to go through this. He tells Harry that he's been the best of friends. He's always going to be the best of friends. And he tells Miles that he's going to be a great, great young man. He's going to be a great hero one day. And then Tom Holland's Peter Parker passes away. This is when we're going to get, like, a thing over the news that not Peter Parker, but Spider-Man has passed away. He died in the fight with Venom and Kingpin. Kingpin has been arrested, and maybe he's sentenced to death. Maybe he's just in, like, a life sentence. Who knows? Eddie Brock is also in a life sentence for the kidnapping of people as well as murder. So there's a funeral held for Spider-Man. We see a bunch of people in the streets, like, crowd together in his honor. Even J. Jonah Jameson is like, I'll admit, he was pretty good. Like, just admit it. And we get this, like, celebration for Tom Holland's Spider-Man. Maybe we get, like, scenes from people, like, watch recordings of the Battle of London, or the Battle of Avengers Compound, or the fight with Spider-Man and the Scorpion, or against the Vulture, and, like, from, like, all of Tom Holland's other battles. It's a big, like, sad, bittersweet ending. And then we cut to Miles Morales. A few weeks later, he's at his house with his family, and he gets a knock at the door. And it's Harry Osborn. And Harry has a box saying, Peter wanted you to have this. Miles takes the box, and Harry says, like, a final goodbye to Miles, and he leaves. Miles opens it, and he sees a note. And it says, like, Miles, like, teaching you and getting the privilege of working with you has been one of the best things in my life for a long time. Like, you were a great protege, and I thought I was alone when I got bit by that spider. I'm so glad that I wasn't. You were such a good young man. You help people. Like, you really are so worthy. You are worthy of the powers you were gifted. And maybe Spider-Man basically says, like, my Aunt May told me before she died, with great power comes great responsibility. That power isn't defeating a crazy supervillain and becoming a hero, but it's about being that person that can protect people, to let people know that they are safe, to let people know that they will be protected as long as there is a Spider-Man. We have the power to protect those people and keep them safe. Let them know that they're safe, but it's our responsibility to do so. Now you have that power, Miles, and it's up to you to decide how you handle that responsibility. Miles goes to the box. It's Peter Parker's web shooters, and there's an instruction manual on how to operate them, how to fix them, how to repair them, how to use them. And we can have a thing that Peter wrote this in advance, knowing that he might not get out of this fight alive. And Miles, he looks at the web shooters, and we get some music playing, and then we cut to on the rooftop of a building. And we see all, like, these Spider-Man posters and, like, New York, like, billboards and, like, light up computer images. And we see this silhouette, like, swinging through New York with the web shooters. Maybe not, like, beautifully, but they're doing it. And then it pans over on as our figure flies onto one of the buildings, or leaps onto one of the buildings. And it is Miles Morales in his comic-accurate black and red Spider-Man suit. And he looks out at the city. We can see, like, the legacy of Peter Parker is behind him. And the legacy of Peter Parker now moves forward with Miles Morales as the new Spider-Man latches onto a building and swings into the camera. And everything goes black. And instead of Peter Parker will return, we get Spider-Man will return. And that is the end of the college trilogy. Well, that was quite dramatic. Well, that concludes the college trilogy. And as you might have thought or considered the idea of through those last few narrations of Miles Morales swinging through the city as the new Spider-Man, and rumors that there are actually going to be 2 Spider-Man trilogies after No Way Home. Yeah, we're going to be doing another trilogy, another Spider-Man Prewrite trilogy, but it's going to be about Miles Morales, and it's going to be the Miles Morales storyline that I have been coming up with for a couple weeks now, alongside writing the script. So I don't think many of you were expecting our Peter Parker to die. Again, the reason I went for that was because I wanted to introduce Miles Morales as the new Spider-Man. And, like, that would be an ending that I don't think many people would expect. That is a subversion of expectations and a moving of legacy. Because we've seen the story of Peter Parker 3 times now in live action. And we also know that Miles Morales, at least in Into the Spider-Verse, didn't come into his own until after his Peter Parker died. At least in Into the Spider-Verse. I don't know how it is in the comics because I don't read the comics. I've just watched the movies. I watched a little bit of Spectacular Spider-Man, and I played the PS4 game. That's it. And I know in Into the Spider-Verse, Miles didn't really become Spider-Man until his Peter Parker died, and then he teamed up with the other Spider-Man from the multiverse. Or the Spider-Verse. I don't know, but it was a really good movie. Anyway, so I wanted to do that because just to make some shock. This movie had a lot to do. It had to wrap up the Kingpin storyline, the Venom storyline. It had to do a Peter Parker and Daredevil team up, set up Miles Morales slightly, and be a worthy conclusion to the 6-part movie event. 6-movie series plus the Avengers movies and Captain America Civil War of Tom Holland's Peter Parker. So hopefully this lived up to your expectations. I mean, I hope. I doubt it, but I hope. And yeah, I'll see you guys with the Miles Morales trilogy. Peace.